Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to Focal Point on AFR Talk, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio, where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics. Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point on AFR Talk. Great to have you with us. I am Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network. Honored to welcome to our decision maker line Mark Crutcher. Mark is the founder in 1992 of Life Dynamics, which is one of the most innovative and professional pro-life organizations in the United States of America. Mark, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to have you with us. And Mark, you're head of Life Dynamics, and just to kind of orient people to you and your organization, and I want you to tell us just a little bit about this before we get into the topic that I want to address with you, which is the sobering level of violence, kind of under the radar violence associated with the abortion industry. You first gained some profile because you were one of the first organizations to do kind of an undercover sting operation on Planned Parenthood. Tell us what you did and what you discovered.
Well, we've done several of them, but I think probably the one you're thinking about is the investigation that we did exposing the fact that the National Abortion Federation and Planned Parenthood are operating a nationwide pedophile protection racket in which they protect the men who sexually abuse children. And we did that several years ago, and it's been redone a couple of times by other organizations on a much smaller scale. But there is no doubt that these organizations are engaged in this practice, and it is a national scandal.
Well, and what you did, Mark, is you had volunteers calling these Planned Parenthood affiliates and clinics and these other abortion providers and asking them, these volunteers, I think, were pretending to be underage girls asking for advice about how to get an abortion and how to protect their boyfriends. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, well, actually, it was just one. We had one young lady who was 24 years old, but she has the voice of a 10 or 12-year-old, and we had her portray a 13-year-old girl who was pregnant by her 22-year-old boyfriend and seeking an abortion in order to conceal this from her parents and from the authorities.
Now, this would be statutory rape, and I think there are laws in all 50 states. You got to report statutory rape if you become aware of it. What did you find out? What did these Planned Parenthood clinics, what were they prepared to do?
Yeah, well, there are mandatory reporting laws in all 50 states, and this scenario that we had fits the mandatory reporting situation where adults who know about this, healthcare workers who know about it, must report it to the authorities. In this case, 91% of all the Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Federation facilities in the United States, and we called every single one, 91% of them agreed to help conceal the statutory rape of what they believed was a 13-year-old girl. And not only did they agree to do this, but many of them would they would tell her, look, darling, that's statutory rape. We're supposed to report this, but when you come in, don't use your real name. Don't tell us how old your boyfriend is. Don't tell us how old you are. We don't want to know any information about this because legally we're supposed to report it. Now, we won't do so. And some of them actually said, we know we're supposed to report, but we won't. And some of them would even give her advice on how to conceal it from other adults who might actually fulfill their legal obligation and report it. So they would give her advice on how to keep that from happening and keeping other people from reporting it.
So in some of these other undercover operations that have been done, like by Live Action Films, Lila Rose, and so forth, Planned Parenthood say, well, look, they're just kind of cherry picking. They're picking a handful of clinics. But you contacted every single clinic in the United States and found that 91% of them. So what Live Action Films and others have uncovered or discovered, reported on, you're verifying that this is system-wide in the abortion industry. Now, I want to change gears just a little bit, Mark. You have produced a new paper, 20 pages, Under the Radar Violence in the Conflict Over Abortion. You're the author. You have Carol Novielli and Renee Hobbs have helped you as researchers on this. But this was a sobering thing to me. I read through it this morning and highlighted in preparation for our conversation today. I really had no idea of the level and the extent of the violence that's associated with the abortion industry. Now, we know that and you report on this, there have been 8 abortion providers who've been murdered over the 40 years of legal abortion in the United States. Now, that's reprehensible. Every one of us renounced that. That's not how we solve these problems. But what you report on is there is a shocking level of homicide, murder, of violence, and injury that's largely going unreported and unnoticed by the mainstream media. Tell us about that.
Yes. You're right, and we've collected this data over a number of years, and then we started researching it a couple of years ago in anticipation of this particular report. And it's the undercover violence that's going on that the abortion industry is fully aware of, and we talk about this in the report, in which women are killed or sometimes just brutally beaten. We had cases of them being left in nursing homes, being put in wheelchairs, being disabled for the rest of their lives over the beatings they took because they refused to have abortions. And the abortion industry, as we proved, is completely aware of this phenomenon, but they do nothing to help prevent it. And one of the things that just really aggravates me is that every time one of these abortionists is attacked, as you know, Brian, there are congressional hearings. Pro-lifers are swept off the sidewalks, whether they're doing anything illegal or not. You have new federal laws passed. RICO statutes are used against pro-lifers. Like I say, the list just goes on and on. If there was an abortionist shot today in America, it would be front-page news for the next 3 nights, at least. And we'd see this whole thing start over again with congressional hearings. There have been times in America when an abortionist was shot, and the U.S. Justice Department put federal marshals at every abortion clinic in the United States to protect these abortionists. Now, here's what I want to know. 8 of them have suffered this fate over 40 years. That's 1 every 5 years. This situation is going on every day in clinics all over America. And we give case studies in this report. We only took 80 of them. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. We only took 80 of the cases that we have, and we only took the cases in which the woman was killed. We didn't even bother with the cases in which she was just put in a nursing home.
So this is, I'm looking at this list here, Mark. It's pages 6 to page 19 of your report. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so per page. You document it. You show the sources in the media. You show the outcome of the trial. In every one of these cases, the perpetrator, almost in every single one of these cases, the perpetrator either confessed or was convicted of having beaten his girlfriend or even his wife in some cases to death because the woman would not have an abortion. When you see this all gathered together in one place, it's pretty shocking stuff. And one of the things you mentioned, Mark, is that the early feminists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, like Susan B. Anthony, they were aware that abortion was a tool that could be used by predatory males. Explain that. Yeah,
most people, if you say the word feminist, they think, oh, that's somebody who's pro-choice on the abortion issue. The reality is that all the early feminists were pro-life. You mentioned Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Virginia Woodhull, Evelyn Judge, who wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, and the list goes on and on. These women opposed the legalization of abortion, not only because it was murder, which they openly stated, but because it also was something that exploited women. They saw it as something that would be used by sexually predatory and sexually irresponsible males to help get them off the hook. And in effect, they saw that abortion would be used as a safety net for these kind of males. The question arises, though, what happens when men who use abortion as that sort of safety net, what happens, what do they do when the woman they've impregnated won't jump into the net?
Well, and you mentioned one other thing, Mark. I want to talk a couple of minutes about that, but you mentioned an interesting dynamic that happens. You have a lot of sidewalk counselors. Most of them are females. What frequently happens to these sidewalk counselors when they're seeking to approach a woman who's going into the clinic and who is accompanied by her boyfriend?
Well, that's a very good lesson here in how this all plays out. You go stand in front of one of these abortion clinics and you see these sidewalk counselors who try to offer women going in an option to having an abortion. And you'll very often see that they're accompanied by some male. And in almost every case, if you watch the dynamics here of what goes on, when these sidewalk counselors approach these women, the women are willing to stop and talk. It's the men who become violent and who become angry, and you'll very often see them physically grab the woman they've brought there and drag her away from the sidewalk counselor so that she can't talk to them.
And so you raised a good question. What happens in these cases where the woman decides that she is going to carry this pregnancy to term? The boyfriend or the husband wants her to abort the baby. So walk us through what happens at that point.
Well, what you very often see here is that these men then become enraged because the woman will not have an abortion, and they will either threaten her or they will start physical violence with her, and that escalates. And in just the cases that we talk about here, just these 80 cases, which is just a small percentage of the ones we have, these women were all killed. Sometimes they'll hire hitmen to kill them. Sometimes they'll kill them themselves. Sometimes they'll recruit the services of a friend or a buddy to help beat this woman to death or shoot her or whatever it might be. And this is a national tragedy that no one is paying attention to. And the question I still have is when you compare the response to this to the response that happens when these overwhelmingly male abortionists are attacked, what I want to know is why do these men count and these women don't?
You know, and I'm looking at this list, talking here with Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics, the number of teenage victims here. I mean, it's just here's a girl that's 17. Here's a girl that was 16 when she was murdered. Here's a girl that was 16. Here's another girl that was 19, 16, 19, 17, 19, 15. Several of these victims were 15 years old, Mark, and they're being brutally murdered by their boyfriends because they won't get an abortion.
And the other interesting thing there is that the overwhelming majority of those boyfriends were adults. These were statutory rape situations. And in some of those cases, we documented in there when we wrote up the case histories where the boyfriend, who was much older and was an adult, killed the girl because she wouldn't have an abortion, mainly to protect himself from being accused of statutory rape.
Now, Mark, we've got about 45 seconds. What needs to be done? What should our response be to this information? What needs to happen?
I want to encourage everybody to go to the website. They can download that report for free at prolifeamerica.com. And when they go to prolifeamerica.com, these two reports pop up on the black screen that comes up before our homepage. This one and a report we did on racial targeting by the abortion lobby. They need to get this information out, and we need to start holding the press's feet to the fire and say, why is it that you will cover ad infinitum for years an abortionist who gets shot, but these women who get killed on a routine basis? And by the way, in the last 2 days, I've gotten 2 more cases in that are current. Why won't they cover this?
Well, Mark, I very much appreciate the work you're doing. Mark Crutcher has been our guest in our Decision Maker line, founder of Life Dynamics in 1992. Go to prolifeamerica.com. I did, downloaded the report, read through it, very, very sobering. This is information that Life Dynamics, Mark Crutcher, has provided to us. We need to get this information out to people in the pro-life community, and we need to make sure that the media takes note. Well, Mark, thank you very much for taking time to be with us. God bless you, my friend, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Brian.